All right. Hello. Looks like we have some early attendees popping in, and please excuse me if I'm looking off. Hey, Kirk. Please excuse me if I'm looking off into the distance. I'm going to get us set up right now with our PowerPoint presentation. Let's see. Hey, Cameron. And looks like Rod is here as well. Do you guys want to do some mic checks really quick? Kirk, I'll start with you. Oh, wait, it looks like you're connecting to your audio still. So Cameron, go ahead.
All right, hopefully you can hear me. I still got some adjustments here to make as well, but I can hear you all right. So.
Awesome. Rod, how about you?
Yep, I can hear you good.
Good. Kirk?
I'm on.
Awesome. Made it. And then Katie, let's see your beautiful face. And if you could do a mic check as well.
Mic check, and my camera is reinstalling. I'll be on in just a second.
All right. Sounds good. We do have some early attendees with us as well. Just wanted to point that out for everyone. We will get started right at noon. And I do want to give us a couple of minutes so that some folks can sign on. So just bear with us while people are getting logged on here. And while we are waiting, we can get started on an early poll. So I do have a poll that I created for some of our folks who are joining early. And the question is, which format for MDT open houses do you normally prefer? And you can choose in-person, Zoom, which is a virtual meeting, or other. And it looks like we have a lot of people who like Zoom so far. Oh, but meeting in person is slowly getting. So yeah, I kind of had a feeling that we might get some people who do enjoy virtual meetings when we host virtual meetings. So that makes sense to me. I hope everyone is having a good day so far. Looks like we have a lot of good sunshine. Looks like we're still seeing a trend for virtual meetings. So that's pretty neat. Maybe we should keep this trend going and keep hosting virtual meetings, team. Although we do have some folks who like meeting in person too. That's never gonna go away. So just wanted to point that out as well. Ooh, I wonder who's thinking about another option other than meeting in virtual. I kind of put that up there. But if you do have some creative ideas, I'm always all ears as far as figuring out other ways to connect with people. So. And we will get started right at noon. Just wanted to give you a heads up. We do have an hour presentation, or not quite an hour presentation, but we do have an hour to talk. We'll be presenting and then we'll be taking Q&A. So just wanted to give you guys a heads up, and we'll be starting here pretty soon. Since we do have that limited time, I want to make sure that we start on time. We're not exceeding our time limit here. Hey, Katie, I do see your face looking good.
Glad it worked.
All right. So it is noon at this point, and I'm going to end the poll. We did see a lot of interest in doing meetings like these, so I'm really pleased to see that. All right. And we can get started. For those of you who don't know me, I am Takami Clark, and just scrolling through this list, I do see some familiar names. So hello again to those who I've talked to before, and hello to some folks who I haven't gotten the chance to meet yet. Again, my name is Takami. I'm guiding us through this presentation. For those who may not have attended the prior open house or haven't met me, I represent Big Sky Public Relations. We work with Montana Department of Transportation on communications for many different projects throughout the state. And some of you may have seen my name before. I work on Highway 78 Red Lodge to Luther. So I provide communications support for that project as well. I am the communications manager for US 212 Red Lodge to Roberts though, and I wanted to let you know that I am available should you guys have any questions or comments. MDT has hired us to help in a number of different ways, from creating press releases for the media to hosting public meetings like this one. We do usually like to host these kind of meetings in person, but due to COVID-19 and our concerns for public safety, we are hosting a virtual meeting. Also here with me is members of the Montana Department of Transportation, as well as our engineering consultant, Sanderson Stewart. Would you all like to say hi? I'll start over with Cameron first.
Hello, my name is Cameron Cloverdons, and I work for Montana Department of Transportation. I work in the Consultant Design Bureau, and on this project, I am coordinating the effort between the consultants and MDT personnel to see this project through completion. Thank you.
Great. Rod, you're next.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rod Nelson. I'm the Billings District Administrator for the Montana Department of Transportation.
Awesome. And then Kirk.
Hi, I'm Kirk Spalding. I work for Sanderson Stewart. We're the consultant that was retained by the Montana Department of Transportation to complete this project. And I act in the role of Senior Project Manager.
Wonderful. I also wanted to introduce Katie Cleets from Big Sky Public Relations. She's monitoring any questions or comments that come through our Q&A system. So feel free to type any questions or comments in that box throughout the meeting. Katie, did you want to say hi? And you are muted, my dear. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Sorry about that. Good morning, everyone. I'm Katie Cleese with Big Sky PR, as Takami had mentioned. So as you have questions throughout this presentation, please feel free to use that Q&A system. It's at the very bottom of your screen. It looks like 2 chat bubbles. Some of them we can just certainly have a correspondence back and forth, but there will be time at the end for members of the team to address them one-on-one.
Great. And again, my name is Takami Clark, and I am the communications manager for US 212 Red Lodge to Roberts. I'm here again if you have any thoughts or any questions, and my contact information is going to be shared at the end of the presentation should you ever want to get in touch. And the last thing I wanted to mention is we are recording this presentation and we're placing it on the project webpage after this meeting. So you're welcome to view it and share it with your friends after this time. And we really appreciate everyone who has joined us today. I'm just really excited to see you guys and hear from you. And yeah, excited for this meeting. I'd like to now turn things over to Cameron.
All right, thank you. Well, to get things started, I'd kind of like to show our project in relation to our overall plan for US 212 corridor. Our project today is the Red Lodge to Roberts, which is shown in blue there. But overall for the whole corridor, we've divided this up into 5 different projects. There was the 8th Street to Robinson Lane project that has been completed already in Red Lodge. Then we have another small project that is Robinson Lane to 2 Mile Bridge Road project, and that's still under development. Then we have our current project, which is in blue there, Red Lodge to Roberts. Then we have the Roberts project that has also been completed in red. And then we have another segment that will that we're advancing through design in the Roberts to Boyd segment. So that's kind of an overview of the corridor. Today we're doing the open house for Red Lodge to Roberts, and that's kind of what we would like to focus on. You're welcome to ask other questions on the other projects. We don't want to, completely, shut anything down on that, but we are more focused on the Red Lodge to Roberts, and probably will, for the sake of time, try and go more into detail on that project today. All right, go ahead and advance the screen. Just also to kind of give everyone an update on where we're at currently in our timeline. Right now, we have a plan, and we have reached out to all the landowners along our current proposed project, and we are in negotiations with them for the right-of-way that we will need to build this project. We kind of anticipate that taking 1 to 2 years. As you know, we're meeting virtually today, and you can imagine our process for meeting with landowners has also been affected by the limitations of being able to meet in person. So that's why we have that wiggle room there of 1 to 2 years. And then hopefully we'll have a project ready for advertisement to select a construction company sometime around 2023. But again, we have to kind of include that there are limitations there as well with that schedule. It is dependent on our funding. When we start projecting out that far, we have some differences in how things are developed, where things fall. Most of our funding comes from federal sources, and that introduces a little bit of uncertainty in the future. So that's where I'm at right now. And now I'd like to turn things over to Kirk, who will discuss our project in a little more detail.
Thanks, Cameron. Yeah, good afternoon. I think one of the front questions people will have is why this project? There are a number of issues out on this corridor that have led to this project being a priority project, to get this thing reconstructed, and the primary motivation behind that is safety. There is a lack of passing lanes and passing accommodations out here. There's shrubbery and whatnot that grows up close to the road and obstructs the view. So we'll walk through a few of these here. The traffic, obviously, the traffic numbers is one concern and one issue that we need to work with here. The traffic volumes have been steadily increasing on US 212 up through Red Lodge into Wyoming. Yellowstone Park visitations have been growing astronomically, that year after year, breaking records in their total visitations. And of course, the events in Red Lodge and in Roberts have gained popularity over the years for those residents in Yellowstone County, Carbon County, and some of the outlying counties, with the rodeo and the parades and the motorcycle rallies and the bicycle rallies and those kind of things. So the more traffic that's put on this facility, the less safe it gets. The highway hasn't really been improved since 2002, so structurally it needs to be reneged. It needs to be beefed up, let's say, to accommodate the higher levels of traffic and last longer. Over many years, they've patched asphalt out here and added more and more asphalt to the little dips in the highway and whatnot. So it's time to get this thing reconstructed in a nice fashion. There's a lifespan to surfacing on a roadway, and year after year after year with traffic beating down on that, it eventually loses its integrity. So humps and bumps and things like that are pretty prevalent out here. Third one there is the narrow shoulders on the road, not very adequate for bicycles and people walking and the Amish buggies that are now becoming more prevalent out here. So we're going to go to 8-foot wide shoulders, which will provide, room for bicycles, for broken down vehicles, for first responders to get by vehicles that pull off. And again, as I mentioned, for perhaps people like the Amish buggies. Flooding has been a concern out here for quite a long time. you know, depending on where you're at along this corridor of Highway 212. In fact, just a couple of years ago, they had some flooding by Boyd, as some of you may recall, and they closed the highway temporarily to take care of some of that. So yeah, the flooding is kind of a big thing. We have a lot of spring water popping out of the banks along this segment, and that water travels along the side of the road, and that seeps in under the highway and jeopardizes the integrity, causes frost heaves and some of those kind of things to the roadway. So, you know, we'll be improving the drainage along the entire corridor to get water from the west side to the east side so it can eventually make its way to Rock Creek. And also we have 14 irrigation crossings out here with some of the major facilities that are here, as well as lots of minor laterals and things like that as well. So sight distance is also a concern. And by that, we mean the ability for somebody who may be pulling onto the roadway or pulling off the roadway or just driving on the roadway to be able to see the hazards and dangers that might be presenting themselves in short order. So these kind of projects will come in and they'll open up the view shed, let's call it, so that along the sides of the road, you'll see that deer that's getting ready to jump out in front of you far in advance. So hopefully you can make a safe maneuver and slow down or whatnot. And then also for those pulling out from the sides, the vegetation that's in a lot of places, you know, really obscures your view of oncoming traffic. And that vegetation will be peeled back to improve the sight distance along there. So going to the next slide here. So what are we going to do to mitigate this situation? Well, one of the main things is in regards to moving traffic safely. And, you know, in addition to widening the shoulders, we're also going to put in a fair amount of passing lanes. In total, around 4 miles of passing lanes. In fact, we're proposing 2.2 miles of northbound passing and about 1.7 miles of southbound passing. And just to get an idea, if you're traveling out there and you want to look at the reference posts, you know, the mile posts along the side of the road, the northbound passing lanes are in that vicinity of around 72 to 75. And the southbound passing lanes are in that vicinity of like about 79 to 81, just to give you some idea of where this might be. So, you know, the passing lanes obviously being one of the main features that we're talking about to improve. And then, you know, this is nearly 10 miles long. And so there'll be a complete reconstruction from edge asphalt to edge asphalt, and then the expanded shoulders necessary. So expect new surfacing and a really nice facility when it's all said and done. In the center top there, adjusting the curves, what we're really talking about is there are some vertical curves out here that are, they obscure your ability to see oncoming traffic. And so some of them are really subtle. But those really subtle vertical curves or vertical impediments can lead to fatalities as people decide to pass, get partway through their maneuver, and all of a sudden a car pops up in front of them. So, you know, we'll be doing some improvements in that sense too. And as I mentioned with the flows and the drainage and flooding, we'll be improving the ditches on both sides of the road, and in some places adding ditches to try and keep the flows within the MDT right away for now, and sending that water to logical locations. Some have heard that we're going to be adding a bus turnaround, and that's on the state property that's about a mile north of Fox. And the purpose of that is so that the two school zones, the one for Roberts and the one for Red Lodge, have the ability to pick up and drop off kids at that location. And it'll get them off the highway, off to the side, you know, 100 feet or so back on the state land, and be able to negotiate that condition. So, and then also there's going to be a way scale, which would also be part of that same bus turnout. It's been designed such that the facilities are separated so that we don't have the overlapping of the two functions. And this way scale is not the one that's open 24/7. It's one of those that can be open to do kind of random weighing, let's say. And then of course the widening with the shoulders on both sides, that's a big element of this project and does lead to, you know, additional need for more right of way and some of that to get this built, but a very necessary part of this project to create a safer environment. And then as I mentioned, we have 14 irrigation crossings, but we have a lot of drainage crossings too, which aren't irrigation water, particularly in that southern half, let's say, of the project where the water is seeping out of the banks around the gravel pit and some of that, we'll be replacing those crossing pipes and adding a few more crossing pipes to accommodate that drainage. So if we advance to the next slide, I just want to show you real quickly the typical we're talking about, just so you have an image. We are talking about 12-foot wide travel lanes, which is a very typical travel lane width, and then the 8-foot shoulders. So there'll be nice separation. There'll be a little more comfortable feel on the road as you go northbound and southbound. And then an example below of the passing lanes, in this case, going, let's say, north is into the page, side-by-side cars negotiating a passing movement, but not conflicting with the, let's say, adverse traffic on the left side. So that's really what I think you can expect to see and why we're doing what we're doing out here. A great project for the community and for the users of Montana. And with that, I will pass it off to Rod Nelson.
Alrighty, well, thank you, Kirk. And again, thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Rod Nelson. I want to briefly discuss a strategy that MDT adopted on all roadways in Montana, including this segment of US 212 between Red Lodge and Roberts. It's called Vision Zero. Vision Zero is a strategy to eliminate all traffic fatalities and serious injuries while increasing safe and healthy mobility for all. Tragically, in 2020, there were 212 fatalities on Montana roadways. Already in 2021, there have been 31 fatalities compared to 16 fatalities for the same time in 2020. So as you can see from the numbers, 2021 has had a very tragic start. When talking about Vision Zero, we often refer to the 5 E's as essential components. They're education, enforcement, emergency services, engineering, and everyone. The project that is being presented to you today is utilizing the engineering component of Vision Zero. But we also want to talk with you about the 5th component of Vision Zero, and that is everyone. To eliminate fatalities and serious injuries on the roads in Montana, we need everyone to do their part. We need everyone to be attentive. We need everyone to drive sober. We need everyone to drive to the conditions and not speed. We need everyone to use their seatbelts. Please, together, we can save lives. So with that, Tacoma, back to you.
All right. As promised, my contact information is here should you wish to get in touch after this meeting. You can reach me at my email address, which is TAKAMI, which is Takami, my first name, at Big Sky Public Relations, all spelled out, .com. Or you can call our project hotline, which is 406-207-4484. And that hotline is staffed by one of our colleagues Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. You're also welcome to visit our website, which is bit.ly.com/Red Lodge Roberts to learn more about the project. You should also be redirected to that site once you exit this meeting. Feel free to browse it at your convenience and know that we will be updating this site continuously throughout the project. I'd like to now transition over to Katie to see what questions we've received, and I do see that we've gotten quite a few already. So Katie, kick us off.
Thanks, Takami. We do. We have some really great questions coming through, and please do keep them coming using that Q&A chat box. So first, we'll start off with a question from Jeff. And Jeff is asking a little bit more about Vision Zero that Rod had mentioned. So Jeff's question is that he's interested in hearing what elements of the project are targeted to accomplishing the Vision Zero goal of the department. So Kirk, maybe I'll turn that over to you.
Oops, I'm trying to get my video going here. Yeah, so I mean, there are a number of very important elements with this project, as with any reconstruction project, that we can entertain this opportunity to really improve the facility. And, some of those things that Rod had mentioned and which I've discussed, improving your ability to see along the roadway. It's greatly going to help in minimizing that collision potential with animals as well as vehicles entering and exiting the road. The wider shoulders allows people to pass on the right with caution should there be something that is unexpected somebody throws on their left turn blinker all of a sudden and you weren't expecting it and you need to negotiate around them real quick. You know, with the wider shoulders, the improved visibility along the roadway and on the roadway, as well as the increased passing opportunities. I mean, that's a big one. You know, we're adding roughly 4 miles of passing to this facility. And, you know, for people to not have to make, I guess, rash decisions on when to pass. You know, not everybody pulls off after they get 3 vehicles behind them like they're supposed to. In fact, rarely do you see that anymore. But, you know, now there's going to be those opportunities for safe passing. And these passing lanes are fairly long in order for people to be able to do the acceleration they need, get around the vehicle and safely diverge back to that lane that they need to be in. So those are some of the primary things we're doing here. And I did talk a little bit about removing some of the vertical bumps in the road. And that's very intentional because of these reasons of, you know, all this, even at nighttime, there's one spot in particular close to the county pit there where, you know, there's a fairly substantial dip in the road and headlights can be hidden until they get a little bit closer to you. So we'll be knocking that out and making it so that it meets current standards for the speeds that we anticipate out here. So hopefully that helps to answer your questions. I don't know, Rod, if you have something more you want to add to that.
I actually did. Could you also maybe tell them about some of the work we're doing with the approaches that will also make this much safer? Absolutely.
So one of the objectives, this project has what's referred to as access control. And there's a resolution, a signed document by the Transportation Commission that allows us to go into this facility and consider consolidating approaches. For instance, if you have one for each property on each side of a property line, you know, we can come back and look at, is that safe? Or would it be better suited to put one shared use approach on that common property line and reconfigure their driveways to tie in at a common location? Another example is to locate approaches opposite one another rather than slightly staggered. It's been proven and it's common practice in traffic engineering to locate accesses opposite one another. In the event that you have opposing left turns, which is probably fairly rare out here, that the cars are not in conflict with one another, being one is in the way of the other, so that they can't negotiate their movement. So, you know, access control, access locations, making them more perpendicular to the highway, more perpendicular to the edge of the asphalt surface. That's one of our primary objectives. And we do go through and realign approaches in many cases to make them perpendicular. Because obviously if it's perpendicular, your visibility left and right is optimal. If you come into the roadway, let's just say at a 30-degree angle, and you need to look over your left shoulder, let's say it's skewed 30 degrees to the right, that's kind of an awkward and difficult thing for you to do with your neck to make sure you can see everything. And so we try to eliminate that. Anything else? Jeff, if that didn't answer your question, feel free to comment again and we'll try to respond a little further if needed.
Perfect. Thanks, Kirk. So we're getting a few odds and ends of questions about construction and what that might look like. So I'm going to try to collect all of those and we can get to those in a little bit. I thought we could maybe focus on those that are coming through specific to the study right now. And so one of those next questions is, has the density of deer been studied specific to the placement of the passing lanes? And this is a question that David has asked.
I would say not necessarily. The location of the passing lanes has largely to do with where we can have the least conflict with vehicles pulling out and have the longest stretch of adequate grade to support passing lanes. It's a pretty arduous process that we go through. There's a Federal Highway Administration software program that's used to help look at where these passing lanes go. And it's largely based on, for instance, coming out of Roberts going southbound. As people had slowed down to come through Roberts, they might start to get close together. And then as they exit Roberts, now the cars are a little bit bunched up. So what comes into play with the passing lane location is more about how does that play into people making the decision to pass? When do they need the ability to pass? We do know where a lot of the wildlife collisions are. And again, part of it was opening up the sides and opening up the views along the side of the roads. It's hoped that that will assist people in seeing the wildlife before it's too late. You know, as part of a highway speed study that was recently done, you know, there was a cluster that had shown up, perhaps a 2-mile stretch where there was a substantial amount of, you know, vehicle animal collisions. And that falls sort of in between these two passing lanes. So passing lane locations. So maybe that's a more favorable outcome unintended. Because, you know, obviously during these passing negotiations, when wildlife enters the equation and somebody's in the middle of a pass, that obscures your ability to see animals off to the side. So I guess that's kind of a long-winded answer around that, but you know, animals specifically weren't looked at in terms of where the passing lane locations would be located.
Thanks, Kirk. If there's nothing more to add on that specific point, and we do have another question from David asking about the project limits essentially. So David is wondering about the southern portion of the project. So he's saying the southern portion of the project on its east side will parallel a section of Rock Creek that floods a 2-mile section of road seasonally. So his question then is, has that area been studied to address specific areas of flooding?
Yeah, I guess I'll respond to that. You know, in terms of flooding from Rock Creek, you know, what we've done is we've improved the drainage ditches on both sides of the road to try to minimize the occurrence of the highway actually overtopping with water. So specifically, no, we didn't look at that section and the seasonal perhaps potential that might flood the road. I know you're talking about, I believe you're talking about 2-mile road actually floods and not the highway, but maybe you can provide clarification, David, on that. But again, you know, the ditch systems that we're going to be providing on both sides of the road are a little bit larger than people are normally used to. And part of that is to provide snow storage. You know, with a larger section of ditch section, we're able to store considerably more snow and keep it from drifting over the highway. But we're also able to convey the waters that come up against the highway to logical locations where we can then outfall those to Rock Creek in a logical manner.
Perfect, thanks, Kirk. And you're right, I did misread that. He was asking about 2-mile road in particular. Okay, I believe we are good there. So the next question is, again, speaking of the larger project area, and Bill has asked if we can clarify that this project does not include the 2-mile bridge road intersection. So Kirk, could you speak to that a little bit?
Yes, it does not include that. The 2-mile bridge road intersection is proposed as a roundabout with the west leg going into the hospital access road, the east leg going onto 2-mile bridge road, and then of course north and south legs. And that's included with the other project that Cameron mentioned, the Robinson Lane to 2-mile bridge road project. And that's not the one we're talking about here. This project will take off from the, let's call it the north leg of that proposed roundabout and continue on to, that's 1,000 or 2,000 feet to the south of the last project. So that's kind of the limits of those.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Kirk. So the next question that we have is related to kind of bike trails in that area. There are a few comments coming in. So Tim is asking a question by saying that the Rails to Trails Conservancy is showing a bike trail on the old railroad right-of-way that parallels 212 in the long range plan. And his question then is, with that context in mind, is there a bike trail being considered in this 212 road improvement?
Not on this segment, no. The wider shoulders are the feature that would accommodate bicycles, but not a bike trail. We do have a multi-use path proposed for the segment from the hospital, well, from 2 Mile Bridge Road south to connect to the system that was built with the 8th to Robinson project.
Perfect, thank you, Kirk. So Tim and Jeff, you kind of had similar questions. So if there's something more that we can provide different context on, please feel free to follow up in that chat and we can address it more specifically. And then somewhat along the same lines, we had another question from Jeff, certainly for you, Kirk, where he's asking if there's anything more that we can share with the crash or injury statistics for the corridor.
Not readily at my hands. I mean, I can pull up the traffic report and show them details from the accidents that were out here. I can tell you that a large percentage are deer vehicle accidents. And that actually is throughout this corridor. The Roberts-Du Bois has similar, Roberts-Du Bois segment has similar percentages of animal collisions there. And again, going back to the environmental assessment that was done for this and approved in 2007, you know, that was one of the main things that was shown as an issue with this was the vehicle animal collisions and what can we do to make it better. And, you know, one of the predominant ways we do that is to clear out the brush between the edge of asphalt and the right of way. And as I think everybody on here knows, there's quite a bit of, you know, aspen groves and brush and things like that in some places where as you're driving along, you do not have any time to react when an animal pops out in front of you. So, you know, if you guys need me to, I'm glad to pull up some accident data from the traffic report, or we can make that available subsequent to this.
I think that's a great question for MDT, but I know Takami could certainly add that to either the project webpage or follow up directly. So maybe if anybody has specific information that they're looking for, throw that into the chat. You can send that to us privately with your contact information. We'd be happy to follow up with you more after that meeting. But I think that's a great kind of overview, Kirk. Thank you. Mm-hmm. So next, Ronald has a good question and he's asking, again, kind of about the project limits, but his specific question is, why are you not doing 3 full lanes for 10 miles?
3 lanes for 10 miles. So I assume he means a continuous 2-way left turn lane down the middle. So to answer that question, we need to go back to the environmental assessment. You know, this project went through, there I see his question now, went through a very detailed process. And when we establish a purpose and need for a project, we have to fall within the parameters of that purpose and need and meet the requirements of the NEPA process, the National Environmental Policy Act, which means we try to minimize disturbance to important resources. Important resources might be fish and wildlife property, which exists here, wetlands, private property, animal habitat, and many other things. So when we look at doing a continuous 2-way left turn lane, for instance, we look at access density. There are quite a few stretches out here where there aren't approaches for some length. And so, you know, having that extra asphalt down the middle wouldn't make a lot of sense. It does help, as Ronald certainly knows, that it eliminates some of the friction between turning vehicles and oncoming vehicles by having a refuge for those turn lanes. But again, the density of turns to justify a left turn lane, just even a short turn lane, it needs to trigger a certain volume threshold before we consider doing turn lanes. So what we have out here is low frequency turning movements and a need for passing. So what happens here is that the passing is the predominant and prevailing factor that we're working with here, is making sure people have avenues. And during those in those passing areas, obviously, it happens, people make a left turn in that passing lane and people can go around them safely in the outside lane. So, inherently these passing zones do provide for turning provisions for the traveling public. So back to that leading question, there's quite a few segments here of just 2-lane, right? Just one opposing lane in each direction. And we try to minimize the impacts to the resources. There is a ton of wetlands out here. And there's also a ton of bird habitat. And as you know, there's bear collisions and there's other things. So there's a lot of habitat out here that we need to minimize our impacts to the natural resources as well as other significant ones that might be historic or culturally important or important to the public, like the Fish and Wildlife Access property. I hope that helps to answer the question of why we did not do a continuous 3-lane section all the way. The passing was very important.
Thank you, Kirk. I think that makes a lot of sense. Ronald, certainly, again, if there's more that you want to add to that, please feel free to add it into the chat. So Kirk, if you could follow up, we're getting a couple of questions and different comments about the number of wildlife that is in that area. And I know you already talked about the crossings a little bit, but could you maybe just revisit that again, just to clarify? Jeff has a good question and he said, I don't hear how the wildlife crossings are being incorporated into this design. And he makes the point, as we're seeing from some comments, that there are a high number of wildlife vehicle collisions along the corridor.
Yeah, so I appreciate that question. With this project, we do not have any specific wildlife crossing features. No tunnels, no overpasses, no wildlife fencing with jump outs or anything like that. Largely this is the hand we've been dealt from the environmental process. It would have called that out as being something necessary for the project, and it did not surface as being something required with this project. I can tell you, having experience on the US 93 project, that went through a very careful evaluation. They brought in consultants to figure out where the migration routes were for some of the animals, the elk, the deer, the bear, the lynx, the bobcat, and all that stuff, mountain lions, not necessarily migration pattern for those guys, but where their highest use was. And they did have very specific locations. And if you've driven the US 93 corridor from Evero to Polson, you'll see all kinds of wildlife accommodations along that route, predominantly around the Joe's Smoke Ring area, which is, I guess, probably closer to Evero. But, there they actually have an overpass, and those are very, very expensive features, as are underpasses, because you need to funnel the wildlife into those. So, long story short, we don't have specific wildlife features with this project for specific crossing locations. I know there are some cluster areas, as there are on some of these other projects. And at this time, there's no intent to address those specifically with the project.
Perfect. Thank you, Kirk. The next question that we have is from Carrie, and asking if we will be providing aprons from the highway into driveways or businesses and homes.
Yeah, so Carrie, the standard practice is that they pave either to right of way or 12 feet beyond the edge of asphalt. And so there typically are at least a short reach of asphalt. And then, if landowners desire to have their approaches paved further than what's proposed, they can certainly work with the contractors to negotiate those terms with them as they're out there. And that, that actually holds true for a lot of different things. If somebody has some private driveway improvements that they desire, as long as the contractors are out here, go talk to the contractor, see if they can wrap it in somehow to some of their work while they've got all the equipment and everything out there, and you can often get a very good deal.
Yeah, I would also just like to point out too, Kirk, we wouldn't leave like a strip of gravel between the highway and a paved driveway. Maybe you could
Right.
speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, so I mean, he just nailed it. We don't leave stuff that's not in kind, um, out there. So we don't create these oddball strips. If there's a concrete apron that somebody has, we look to, during the right-of-way negotiations, that kind of stuff will come up. But whether we extend the concrete to the right-of-way or we do something of that nature, but we don't leave it in disrepair or troubling for the landowners. And that's why the apron is paved for some distance away from the edge of asphalt, as well as that we don't want that bump between a private approach and the edge of asphalt to be an issue.
Great. If there's nothing more on that topic, Carrie and I did send you Takami's contact information in the chat so she can follow up more directly in regards to your specific parcel. But if there's anything more for the group, please feel free again to throw that into the Q&A. Next for you, Kirk, Kim is asking if you could revisit where the passing lanes will be.
Sure. I don't know if you wanted me to try to show them this, Takami, or if you want me to get into a little more verbal explanation. I do have a copy of the traffic plan, so I can help show that.
Yeah, I think that would be nice.
Okay, so let's see. Give me to share here. Go on to this one. And do you guys see some road plans here?
We do.
Okay, so let me go to the traffic plans, which help a little bit to kind of show the layout of the passing lanes. I'm going to start here, and this may help with some of the other questions about where does this project truly begin. At the top of the screen here, we have the roundabout that's proposed with the Robinson to 2 Mile project. This goes to the hospital. This is 2 Mile Bridge Road. The limits extend up about 3 approaches. And then this project that we're talking about today takes off from here. You can see the speed limit is 70 heading northbound and reduces to 45 coming into the roundabout. There's all kinds of warning signs in too as well. But as you extend to the north, so again, this is a split frame. So this is the beginning of the project and it picks up and continues over here and will continue on for a mile or so. And we actually have a little bit of an alignment shift that starts through here to avoid a lot of the private ponds and things along the sides over here. You can see that there are some passing, two-way passing here that occurs, and then it goes to double yellow. And as we move further north here, now these stations are 100-foot ticks, so here's 1,000 feet. So if we take off from 2 Mile Bridge Road, let's say this is 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 feet. We've gone a mile so far, and then you enter into that first passing lane. And so, the county pit is up here on the hill, and this is where that passing lane begins and continues northbound here. I think I said I'm trying to remember 2.2 miles, going northbound here. And then we get up to the curve and it goes around that real flat curve. It's really the only curve between Red Lodge and Roberts. So that curve, it continues on around and then it'll merge back. And I know there were questions before this meeting about how the passing lanes end. And this is the very conventional triple diagonal arrow. There's usually 2 to 3 sets of those depending upon the speeds. In this case, there's 3 sets of those to try and give people a recovery area in case they miss the signs that the passing lane is going to end. So again, this goes about 2 miles. And then if we go to the end and we work our way back from Roberts, I'm going to go to the very north end here. So this connects to the project that was just constructed associated with the Roberts project. So people probably have a pretty good feel for where the end of that asphalt starts. And we jump right into the passing lane going southbound. And so this one also in that proximity, I think it's 1.7 miles of southbound passing lane. So now keep in mind, we're actually headed south as I go through here. So we're down here and then we're up here, and you can see the dimensions of the lanes here. So you've got the 8-foot shoulder, the 12-foot travel lanes, including the 2 passing here. So that kind of gives you the idea. Obviously, the animal signs will be updated to be really reflective, whatever the current MUTCD traffic standards are, and all signing will be brought up to current standards associated with passing lanes. So you'll see the right lane ends, you'll see the merge left, you'll see all those kind of things, new milepost signs and all of that. So I think I stopped sharing.
You did. That was great, Kirk. Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
Along those lines, there are a couple of questions about, ooh, my Q&A went away. There we go. There are a couple of questions about what might be happening in that area. So Keith is asking if the bridge north of Roberts will require reconstruction or if this is part of that project.
That is not part of this project, and it will not be reconstructed. You know, it will receive new guardrail and, you know, on the ends, the connections and flares that are required for guardrail. But no, that bridge stays as is.
Easy enough. Thanks, Kirk. Next, Patrick is asking if there's a planned turn lane onto Moose Tracks.
There are no specific turn lanes on this project.
Easy enough again. Okay, next, Bill is asking about the gravel pit near the project. So he says that on the south end of the project, just north of Red Lodge, there's a well-used and established gravel pit, excuse me. He's wondering if there are any considerations being provided for it.
Nothing specific in regards, again, to turn lanes. As you might recall on the passing lane stuff, that's kind of where the extra lane starts. So, you know, there will be some accommodation there for the acceleration of a vehicle, depending on the direction they're going. You know, should they be going northbound, they can pull into that passing lane when it's available and people can get around them. But, you know, the main thing, again, to think about here is, you know, that's a pretty steep approach coming down the hill there. And we're going to bring those as close to standard as we can. Now, as this gentleman no doubt also knows, there's a ton of water coming out of the ground there. You know, you walk up in the brush there a little ways and there's water just literally pouring out of a culvert out of nowhere. And we're dealing with that water in this fashion. We're trying to minimize disturbance of that embankment there. And just south of the approach going up to the gravel pit, we're going to put a containment berm. That berm is, I believe, 4 feet high. It's made out of gravel. It's more of a, and Cameron will know a lot more about this than me, but it's a gravity-based system where you put a ton of rock out there in a pile, and if that bank decides to come down like it has in the past, it will hopefully hit that barrier of rock, which is not really big rock, it's small rock, but it's a big mass, with the intention of stopping the flow of debris down towards the highway. So a separate issue, but as long as we're talking about that specific location, I wanted to bring that up, that, you know, we're going to put in a containment barrier there to hopefully prevent future slides down onto the highway there that have happened in the past.
Thanks, Kirk. And just in the interest of time, we have about 12 minutes left and we have a number of questions. So I want to make sure that we can get to all of them. And if for some reason we can't, Takami's contact information is on this screen. And I want to make sure to reiterate that you can certainly follow up with her after this meeting. This may be one of our first conversations, but certainly not the last. So with that kind of in mind, the next question, Kirk, is as we're looking at kind of the end of this project, Todd has pointed out that he usually drives around 65 miles an hour in the corridor just because of the wildlife, and he gets passed all the time. So when the project is done, is there an estimation of what the new project's speed limits might be posted at?
Yeah, so in those signing and striping plans that I was showing before, you know, the posted speed limit will remain as it is today. again, with wildlife notification signs being given at each end. So 70-mile-per-hour daytime posted speed limit, 65 at nighttime. Those are the speed limits that will be out here. And for trucks, you know, it's the lower speed limits. It's the 60 and 55, 60 daytime, 55 nighttime. And yeah, people get pretty anxious to pass out here, and that's why we're installing the passing lanes, is to hopefully end that nightmare for people.
Thanks, Kirk. Next question is from Jeff, who is asking if rumble strips separating the travel lanes and shoulder to protect bicyclists and pedestrians could be installed as part of this project.
Well, that's a very good question. I think that's something we can look at. I know the rumble strips, and Rod, you may know more, but the rumble strips have been considered a bit of an obstacle for bicyclists. I know I used to do the MS ride from Billings to Red Lodge, and those rumble strips would about knock you off. And so I do understand that. I think that that's something that we need to look at maybe a little bit here too, because it is a pretty hefty bike route for some folks. You know, it's a nice 54-mile ride, I believe it is, to Red Lodge from Billings. So Rod, is there anything you can say about that in terms of the bike? I know the rumble strips has been something that has kind of morphed over time, but you know, the centerline rumble strips are required, the edge rumble strips are proposed. So what, is there anything else you can say about that in terms of bikes?
Yeah, I think with an 8-foot shoulder, we're going to have plenty of room for bikes. And really, and I think the question, I interpreted it right, and it's not up on the screen where I can read it right now, but when I did see it for a second, I thought that the implication was that the rumble strip would provide protection actually for people that are riding a bike on the shoulder, because then any errant vehicles would hit that rumble strip before they actually got across and over onto the shoulder. So yes, there's going to be shoulder rumble strips. Yes, they're going to be uptight to that outside shoulder stripe. And yes, they do provide that protection for bicyclists as well that are riding on the shoulder.
Yeah, and I think, Rod, the one thing there is, particularly in these races or benefit rides, you know, when you have to pass somebody, oftentimes you have to go over the rumble strips. But I know that they had looked at this a while back to make them more bike friendly, so they were more dished than, I guess, I don't know what the word would be, rather than perpendicular sides in those things, they're more dished. So I'm not sure that we've totally answered that question, but the rumble strips serve many purposes, and primarily to keep people from crossing over and ending up down in the ditch. And they will be implemented with this project, both centerline rumble strip as well as the fog line or the shoulder one.
Great. Thank you, Kirk and Ron, on that one. I'm going to summarize a couple of questions that are somewhat similar. So there's a few folks saying that they have some concerns about the passing lanes in front of the KOA, especially with heavy summer traffic. So Kirk, is there anything that you could speak to of like study that's been done in that particular area, or if there's any considerations being made?
Yeah, not particularly at this time. I know the discussion has come up here recently about the KOA and possibly requesting an additional access point. And you know, some of the concerns will change if that should be moving forward. You know, it does spread out the access entrance and egress to 2 locations instead of 1. But again, no proposed left turn lane going in there or any kind of acceleration lane onto the main line roadway. So I can just say that, you know, as far as provisions specific to the KOA, they were not included with this project. It wasn't deemed necessary through the work we had done, and therefore wasn't included in the project.
Yeah, and maybe you could speak to it. It wasn't deemed necessary by the traffic volumes, the turning volumes that were indicated there.
Right. You know, and should it have substantial expansion at the KOA and generate more turning movements or something to that effect, I mean, it can be looked at more, but I can tell you that the volume, the threshold that leads to turn lanes is pretty noticeable. So I guess I'll put that out there. If there's concern that it hasn't been looked at adequately enough, then we can bring that back to the table. If a letter is written in and take a more detailed look at that in current day.
Okay. Thank you, Kirk and Cameron. Just so we can make sure that we talk about this, there have been a few questions related to construction that I had mentioned sooner. So to group some things together, folks are curious if we could speak one about the timeline, both getting the project potentially ready for construction, but then specifically if there are any pieces that we could share about the duration of how long a construction project like this might take. And then if there are any specific understandings that may be already considered for detour routes, and if specifically if folks might be diverted onto county roads. So construction timeline, duration of construction, and then detour routes if possible.
And I don't know, Rod, if you want to take off on that one or have me touch on some of it and then pass the baton.
Well, yeah, sure, absolutely. So, as far as duration of how long we would expect construction to be on a 10-mile reconstruction project, a lot of it depends on when a contractor actually gets started. So if they get started, let's say in the spring, April 15th, they would be able to go full bore on it through the summer and into the fall. And the majority of that project would be completed in that summer. With that being said, there's still going to be probably some outstanding items, such as seeding, that kind of stuff that would take place beyond that. And so typically when we take a look at a project like this, we could say it's going to take about 1.5 years.
And in terms of, I see quite a few questions coming up about construction, like sequencing and operations and how it's going to work. At this juncture, the way that the special provisions have been written for the contractors, we're not pushing traffic onto the county roads. This road is such that as we're not doing a major realignment and we're not, doing anything quite like that, the road would be built in essentially pieces and maintaining northbound, southbound traffic. This road is going to be pulverized, which means they grind up the surfacing and the underlying material, and then they can blade that out and widen a little bit and then put gravel and a fresh mat of asphalt on top. But what that tells you is that, a lot of this can be driven on during its construction. We can alternate sides, so expect pilot cars and flaggers and the typical stuff that you see, but the intent is not to push traffic onto the county roads, but to try and get them through the construction zone safely and efficiently by having the contractor phase construction such that it works for the traveling public. There are so many events in Red Lodge and whatnot that load this facility very heavily that, we can't afford to see that kind of thing happen where we shut down the road and force things that aren't reasonable. So I hope that helps a little bit with the construction, some of the questions about pushing traffic around.
Thank you. I believe that it does, and certainly folks, if not, feel free to follow up with us after this meeting. There are a couple of questions about the timelines for other projects. So if we could maybe speak to the tentative date for both the Roberts and Boyd project and then the Robinson and 2 Mile Bridge project, if anybody has anything that they could share on those.
Cameron, I think that's going to be up your alley the best.
All right. Yes, the Roberts to Boyd project is not as far along in the design phase as this project is. And we anticipate it will be after this. Right now, we're still developing our plan, and we haven't gotten to the point where we are reaching out to the property owners yet to discuss right of way. So we envision this being after that, and with the uncertainty, like I said, we're optimistic that maybe we could begin construction in 23 on this one, but that is also dependent on other factors. So you would push that out. Construction for the other one probably isn't until even optimistically, like 25. But again, now we're dealing with even much larger uncertainties. So that's kind of what we're looking at on that project. And the poster child for uncertainty is the Robinson to 2 Mile project. It was actually envisioned that we would complete that project prior to this Red Lodge to Roberts segment. But one of those delays has occurred that's outside of MDT's control. It doesn't involve MDT, but MDT is kind of stuck on the sidelines, and we can't complete some of our right-of-way purchases until some other issues get resolved. And we have no control over that time frame. So that one is could be open-ended. If those issues get resolved quickly, we could end up maybe moving that in earlier than this segment. But if those delays continue, it could be pushed out until after this segment. So I think that's about as specific as I can get to answering that question right now. Is that the next one up to bat is Red Lodge to Roberts. The wild card being the 2 Mile section will fit that in as it is possible, and then we would be moving on to the Roberts to Boyd. Hopefully that answers that.
Thank you, Cameron. And unfortunately, I have to be the bearer of bad news. It is after 1 at this point, and I really appreciate all the great questions that have come in. I will do my best. I can actually pull a log of all of our Q&A. So I'll try and see who submitted what and try and get you guys answers over the next couple of days. But if you don't hear from me, please do feel free to reach out to my email or our project hotline, and we will get you answers. And I also wanted to do a plug that we are going to return at 5:30 p.m. So if you do have time to check in, feel free to sign on, just sign up for that meeting as well, and sign on a little bit after 5:30, and you don't have to go through the whole presentation if you don't want to, but you're welcome to use that opportunity as well to submit your questions. And thank you so much for your patience with us and for submitting these great questions. We really, really appreciate it. All right, and with that, I think we're gonna call it. Thank you so much for your time, and we really appreciate just the chance to talk with you all. Again, thank you guys, and hope you have a great day after this. Take care.